Hi everyone, welcome back to the next video in the Couch Cruiser series. Today we're going to look at center versus aft cockpits. Unlike some of our previous videos, this one is a lot more subjective, where the statements made about the center and aft cockpit, pros and cons, are more generalizations that may not hold true to the particular model that you're looking at or the particular boat in question. That said, let's look at some examples of center and aft cockpit boats. There at the top left, you see an example of an aft cockpit boat, and at the bottom right, you see an example of a center cockpit boat. Now, some of the things that you'll see right away, where the name comes from, it's pretty obvious. The next thing that you'll notice is check out the bottom right picture there for the center cockpit. Notice the size of the cockpit compared to the top left. Center cockpits typically end up having a smaller overall cockpit than do aft cockpits. One of the advantages, though, that some people like about the center cockpit is it's easier to fully enclose the cockpit, and if you're traveling with pets or small children, they feel like it's safer to have a center cockpit because it's harder to fall out of it. So there at the top left, your aft cockpit, bottom right, your center cockpit. So moving on to the full list of pros and cons. And remember, as I said before, these are generalizations of the center and aft cockpit. But generally, a center cockpit will raise the entire level of the deck. Raising the entire level of the deck gives you a higher headroom inside. It also gives you a larger aft cabin. But raising that cockpit sole, or the floor of the cockpit, raising that increases the windage on the boat, making it more difficult to sail upwind. It increases the motion because the higher you are off the water, the more that you move back and forth as the boat heels. Finally, because you're farther towards the bow, when you're going to wind and spray kicks up, you're more likely to get wet from that spray. So as we stated earlier, the center cockpit is also easier to fully enclose. And I mean that in two ways. It's easier to fully enclose so that people don't fall out. It's also easier to fully enclose from the weather so that you're not getting as wet, or if you're going to be traveling in higher latitudes where you need to stay warm, it'd be easier to fully enclose that center cockpit. Finally, and the biggest pro, and one of the undisputable pros of a center cockpit, is it gives you an awesome aft cabin. And the great thing about it is not only is it huge, looks like a hotel room, but that aft cabin is also separated from the rest of the boat, giving you a lot more privacy. So with the aft cockpit, the great thing about the aft cockpit is because all of your steering is at the aft of the boat, it's a lot easier to attach a wind vane if you're going to be using a wind vane for your self-steering. If you're going to be using an autopilot, not such a big deal. The aft cockpit also gives you typically a larger saloon because they don't need to put the walkway up to the center cockpit right in the middle of the saloon. And the aft cockpit is typically larger than a center cockpit. So if you have a lot of people on the boat, that might be the way to go. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of different boats that use the center and aft cockpit. So here's an example of two yachts from Sea Yachts, and the reason I selected these ones is they are the same size. One's just expressed in feet and one's expressed in meters, and because they're from the same manufacturer, it's easier to compare apples to apples. The big difference you can see here is the configuration of the aft cabin. In the right-hand picture, we have our aft cockpit boat, and what you can see there is you have two smaller aft cabins where you have to climb over the bed in order to get into it. In the center cockpit edition, you can see that the saloon is a little bit smaller, but that aft cabin is huge, and it gives you one master bed back there, and that is separated from the rest of the boat, giving you some decent privacy. If you go to seayachts.com, though, you can actually check out more pictures of those yachts and see the walkthroughs to get a feel for the difference. So we looked at the differences, we looked at some generalizations in the difference between the aft and the center cockpit. What it really breaks down to, though, is do you want the aft cockpit shown there on the right, or do you want the center cockpit with the amazing aft cabin there on the left? When I started this video, I was all about the aft cabin and the center cockpit. As I looked more into it though, and as I thought about it a little bit more, it's really a toss-up on which I would go with. I think as I do more research and as it comes time for me to buy a boat, I will not select simply based on where the cockpit is. It seems that you really have to look at the specific boat in question and how well that boat meets your needs. As always, thanks again for watching. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments or suggestions for further videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.